Lu baru gak sih, Kak?
Apa?
Kursi lu baru ya?
Kagak, udah lama sih.
Pasti baru lihat.
Ya, enggak. Ini udah lama. Tapi plastiknya belum pernah dicopot.
Anak higienis.
Halo saudara-saudari, terima kasih telah bergabung. Buset, kok kayak gini formal amat.
Santai. Hai guys.
Hai guys, welcome back to another video.
Ya gitu.
Hari ini gue ditemani sama temen gue lagi, Jonathan Atmaja. Lu mungkin pernah ngeliat, lu mungkin pernah melihat dia di video sebelumnya, di mana kita mereview makanan-makanan yang harus kalian coba. Jangan lupa untuk dicek out juga video itu. Nah, Jo, hari ini kita mau mereview sesuatu yang berbeda. Bukan mereview sih, kita mau nonton sesuatu yang beda.
Apa tuh?
Lu belum tahu kan? Nah,
Belum.
Hari ini kita mau mereview lagi. Mau nonton, sebenarnya lebih ke mendengarkan cerita-cerita horor yang merupakan kejadian asli. Jangan lupa untuk matikan lampu kalian.
Gap. Nih ya, untuk saya lagi nonton di rumah, ini lampu tengah gue matiin. Ini yang nyala cuma lampu tidur. Oke.
Minta orang tua lu untuk lampu luar dimatiin juga.
Jangan dong.
Jangan lupa lu tutup korden.
Lemarinya gerak sendiri aja.
Tutup korden, jangan.
Iya, gorengnya gue tutup. Gorengnya gue tutup. Oke.
Tiba-tiba ada bunyi.
Nah, bro.
Nih, kita langsung ke videonya ya, guys.
Coba ya. Di sini nih, Gap, kita benar-benar dilihat oleh YouTube kejantanan kita.
Diuji kejantanan kita, Jo.
Betul.
Ini ya. 3 true scary horror stories. Nah, seperti yang video minggu lalu kan gue bilang, lu kalau cheat day lu mau bilang mana. Nah, kalau di sini gue bilang, menurut lu nanti lu urutin dari yang paling tidak seram ke yang paling seram. Lu urutin aja. Setelah kita nonton video.
Sudah. Video berapa menit, Gap?
Videonya sekitar 10-an.
Yalah.
Oke, yuk. Tanpa basa-basi lagi, kita mulai. 3, 2, 1. Kedengaran kan suaranya? Kedengaran nggak suaranya?
Nggak ada.
Oh, nggak ada.
Belum ada suara. Itu suaranya kecil.
Oh, ini dia nih. Oke. Udah gue share sama.
Yep.
Ada suara dikit gitu, suara.
Yep.
I'm alone one night during winter break. I was watching TV in our sunroom, which is like a smaller living room type space, which we use as a TV and movie room. There was also a door to the side driveway in this room. I had all the blinds shut and was under a blanket watching some random movie I don't even remember when out of nowhere the lights turn on outside. We have a motion sensing light out there, so the fact that it turned on was concerning. I had to lower the volume on the TV to listen up for any possible sounds. It was unlikely I'd hear anything from outside though, so I lifted the blinds briefly just to do a quick check. It was clear. There was no way that I know of to shut off that light, so as annoying as it was, I just had to wait. I figured it was a raccoon or a possum or something that might have triggered the light. Though the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. So I put on my shoes and just walked around the driveway to ease my mind. No one was there, so I could go back to watching TV with a clear head.
Lu berani nggak misalnya ada motion sensor light lu nyala gitu, terus habis itu lu pakai baju lu keluar gitu?
Sumpah. Enggak. Gila. Ya kecuali mungkin kayak kalau misalnya sensornya bisa ngerasain ada kecoa yang lewat atau ada cicak lewat, gue masih ngerti. Tapi kalau misalnya kayak yang mereka baru nyalanya kalau misalnya ada sesuatu yang gede yang lewat, concerning. Gue gak berani sih kalau itu.
Concerning. Misalnya lu tahu gitu orang tua lu lagi keluar gitu, lu ditinggal di
makanya
rumah misalnya 2 hari gitu, terus malam pertama tiba-tiba motion sensor lu udah nyala, udahlah.
Sumpah itu serem sih.
Some time passed, and I suddenly heard a bucket full of something fall over outside, and then the motion sensing light turned back on. The first time it happened, I was concerned, but now I was straight up scared. Someone or something was out there. I was hoping it was an animal, but I really started to doubt it. I didn't want to get up because the couch was actually the only blind spot from the door to the side, and I had a fear of getting up and seeing somebody standing at that door. I wanted to shut the TV now, but the remote was in the middle of the coffee table, and I was afraid to even move that much. I looked to the blinds, which were fully pulled shut. However, I wasn't looking at the blinds. I was looking at what I saw through the blinds. There was a perfect outline of a person standing on the other side, with their arms stretched out a bit from their body. I don't know how to describe in writing how I felt in that moment, but there was an intense feeling in my heart and stomach area, and I felt like it was harder to breathe. That's how scared I was. I got up from the couch as quietly as I could, but before I could even get to the door that separates the sunroom and the dining room, the person on the other end started knocking aggressively on the window. I wanted to scare them away somehow, but I was too scared to go out there. So I screamed in a shaky voice, "I'm calling the cops." I stood by the doorway for a second.
Aduh.
Coba napas.
Oh.
Tuh, lu bayangin deh, Gab. Itu kan rumah lu kan pintu depannya teralis ya. Terus kan misalnya lu lagi nonton TV di kursi meja makan lu nih.
Iya.
Lu nengok kiri ada orang depan pintu jeger gitu.
Apalagi kalau lu tempatnya kayak lu misalnya lu kan kalau salah rumahnya tuh, jadi ini kan lu di kamar kalau nggak salah, di luar kamar lu tuh langsung sofa ya, langsung bisa nonton TV kan kalau nggak salah. Terus habis itu kan lu nonton TV ngadep sini, kalau nggak salah sebelahnya itu pintu depan kan gitu. Coba lu lagi nonton gitu, tiba-tiba lu nengok gitu ke depan pintu lu kayak gini, langsung ada orang gitu.
Sumpah. Itu bukan teriak gue cipirit. Yakin gue.
Misalnya atau nggak lu lagi berdiri tiba-tiba lu nengok ada orang gitu, kencing lu berdiri.
Fix itu.
Second to see if they stopped, and they did. But I saw the shadow beyond the blinds move towards the door, and I saw some old, crazy-looking woman with wiry hair on the other side of the door. For a moment, I felt less intimidated, until she started banging on the glass of my door with both hands, screaming as if she were mental. I slammed the door to the sunroom and called 911. I reported some crazy, mental old woman attempting to break into my house. I was told to wait in a safe, locked room with a weapon to defend myself until the police arrived. Any nightmare I ever had about a break-in came true when I heard glass shattering outside of the bathroom. I waited a minute after not hearing anything to slowly and quietly unlock and open the bathroom door. I peered into my living room, and there she was, the old woman with the wiry hair, standing in the middle of my living room in front of a broken window. She spotted me when I had the door open and came rushing over to the door. I screamed like the scared 17-year-old I was and slammed the door shut again. The old woman started knocking on the door and wouldn't stop. She was saying things under her breath on the other side, and I couldn't make out any of it. I was too busy crying and begging her to go away. I finally heard a bang at the front door, so I opened the bathroom window and screamed help. 2 cops came up to the window I was screaming through, and I begged them to crawl through the broken window out back. They assured me they'd be okay and they'll be right here. The knocking at the door stopped, and a sudden commotion was taking place outside. I heard the 2 cops scream at the woman to step away from the door. When I stepped out from the bathroom, the 2 cops had the insane woman detained. I'd imagine they did it pretty easily. The woman looked at me with a look of crazy in her eyes, and I looked away. It turned out the old woman lived in a nearby house with some woman who never leaves the house. None of the neighbors ever really see her. The old woman was messed up in multiple ways and belonged in some kind of special care place. My parents pressed charges on the younger woman because they felt as her supposed caretaker, she should have been held liable for allowing a mentally disabled person to break into someone else's house. Sadly, my parents lost the lawsuit, but the old crazy woman was out of our neighborhood at the very least, and was put in some kind of treatment center.
Lihat nggak tadi?
Well,
Nenek-neneknya itu mukanya kayak apa? Itu kan sebuah umpamaan gitu ya. Tapi kalau itu aja yang muncul, gue udah takut loh.
iya gue. Maksudnya kayak mukanya kayak masih muka standar nenek-nenek gitu ya, bukan yang kayak muka itu kan.
Iya.
Lemah banget gue, sumpah ini aja deg-degan banget.
Itu bener cuma nenek-nenek.
Parah.
Bukan hantu.
Padahal
Tapi
bukan
cuma
hantu kan, makanya.
Tau nggak? Yang paling takut apa kalau sama orang yang mental health? Bukan apa-apa ya. Takut tuh ada yang bawa pisau gitu tiba-tiba.
Iya anjir. Aduh. Maka kayak mereka nggak ngerti akal gitu, akal budi gitu kan.
Ya.
Jadi ya ngeri.
Makanya nggak bawa pisau, udah bawa gunting. Aduh.
Ingat gak sih waktu kita nonton yang sama teman-teman yang Purwanto yang waktu ke sinema
Ya.
Yang nenek-nenek juga.
Ratu Ilmu Hitam.
Ya itu. Ya mirip-mirip lah. Ada nenek-nenek gedor.
Makanya mirip.
Kemana itu unsurnya lebih horor kan. Udah kesan.
Yang Ratu Ilmu Hitam, sebenarnya Ratu Ilmu Hitam yang klimaksnya yang pas mereka nggak tahu diapain itu sebenarnya nggak terlalu serem. Tapi yang sebelum-sebelumnya kayak yang ada sejarahnya gitu loh. Nenek-nenek gila. Yang
dia iya yang dikurung terus kepalanya gedor-gedor itu kan.
Jadi jedot-jedot sampai berdarah itu, aduh itu.
Iya.
Itu mah. Itu sebenarnya itu yang serem. Itu yang paling serem.
Iya, terus ada bagian yang apa? Ada cewek yang kan dia makan kelabang kan.
Ya. Terus kelabangnya jalan di tangan.
Gitu. Terus dikorek. Anjir.
Sama yang ada perempuan juga tuh yang pengen kurus terus akhirnya dia mulai motong-motong badannya gitu sampai leher.
Gorok-gorok sendiri.
Gitu.
Oh, ini tahu yang pas anaknya lagi main game.
Oh iya.
Main game. Yang sih pada krok.
Iya. Makanya.
Bah itu.
Aduh.
Jantung.
Terus yang tiba-tiba mulutnya di stapler mulut anaknya di stapler maksudnya.
Iya anjir. Oh iya itu.
Udah. Itu jangan ingat, kita lanjut sama ini aja.
Ya oke dah.
Oke. Ya.
I own a small house on a big property in the rural part of New York, and I go up there a bunch of times a year in the winter months to go skiing. There's a neighbor up there that I'd never spoken to once. There's a fence that separates our 2 yards. Then on the other sides of my house is woods for miles. There's another neighbor further down the road across the street, and I'd met him a number of times because he happens to go skiing too, so we got to know each other based off that. I went up this past January for the first time in the season. As I walked up to the front door, I heard a kid laughing nearby in the neighbor's house's direction. I figured they had kids, which was news to me. Stepping into the house for the first time each season was always weird. A house that would be empty for a majority of the year, so I'd have to turn on the water and heat and everything, of course. The first night, I slept like a baby after the 4-hour drive from Connecticut. The next morning, after eating breakfast and changing into my ski gear, I went outside and found a big red ball sitting in the snow on my front lawn. It wasn't there the day before, so I assumed it belonged to the neighbors. I took the ball and threw it over the fence separating our properties. Then I went off to the ski lodge to meet my friend, and we spent the day skiing. When I got back, it was dark out. I'd eaten dinner with my friend, so I was ready to go to bed. Walking to the front door, I noticed that once again, that big red ball was sitting on my front lawn. Now it was getting a bit odd, but once again, I threw that red ball over the fence. I woke up in the middle of that night to laughing outside. A kid's laughter. It was like 2 or 3 a.m. A kid playing outside made no sense. I went to look out my window. I couldn't see any kids though, and now the laughter had stopped. However, I did see something sitting on my front lawn. I couldn't tell from the window, so I went outside into the snow in my slippers and robe, and saw that red ball once again sitting in the snow. I got chills as I saw it in the same spot once again. I took the ball, And this time, instead of throwing it over the fence, I brought it inside my house. I went back to sleep, not hearing any laughter outside again that night. The next morning, before going skiing again, I walked over to the neighbor's house, knocked on the door, and finally introduced myself. Surprisingly, he was an elderly man who seemed completely innocent. I questioned the child's laughter I kept hearing, and the ball that kept ending up on my lawn. He told me there were no kids around there. I got chills again. I thanked him, shook his hand, and went back to my house. I left the red ball in my living room, then drove back up the mountain and had another day of skiing with my friend. When I got back to the house that night, I was completely exhausted and ready to go home the next day. I threw all my stuff on the couch and figured I'd pack it all up tomorrow. I literally crashed into the bed as my whole body was sore, and I fell asleep like a baby. Except I woke up to a kid's laughter outside again. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window to look outside. There was the red ball, sitting in the snow again. I ran to the living room and tore the room upside down looking for the ball. I still know to this day I'd left it in there when I left, but it wasn't there now. I suddenly didn't feel alone in the house. I turned on every light as I packed up all my wet gear into my bag. I threw everything in the bag so I'd be ready to go if shit hit the fan. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and they were, so it made no sense. I left the lights on and went back to my room, shutting off only those lights. I looked out the window, and far behind the red ball out in the snow was what looked like a kid. A kid just standing stiff, looking towards my window. I ducked down and closed the blinds. I closed the blinds to every window in my house.
Tahu nggak, gue mau ngomong ini. Satu serem. Dua, lo inget nggak anak kecil perempuan yang kartun ya, yang ada di film Monster Incorporated?
Ya,
Mirip nggak badannya sama yang ini nih?
imajinasi lu bisa aja deh, Kap.
Coba lu cari, mirip banget, asli mirip banget.
Iya dah.
Iya kan? Ini Photoshop-nya jago nih orang.
Iya bener. Iya mirip
Iya
deh.
kan mirip.
Kepala tuh kayak ada yang apa rambutnya itu deh, kayak.
Ya ada kayak rambutnya gini.
Iya ya.
I tried my best to just go to sleep and ignore it. It was a long hour before my exhaustion overcame my fear and I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning, skipped breakfast, packed up the car, and sped the hell away from there, not looking back to the red ball that was still on my front lawn. I've never had anything to be stolen in that house, so I was okay with leaving it in this situation. Either way, I can't figure out how whoever was out there got into my house to take the ball out in the first place, and that child's laughter still haunts me. But the scariest part of the whole experience was seeing that child standing outside in the cold snow in the middle of the night. Had that ball not been taken out of my living room somehow, this whole thing would be different. But because of that, I don't know what to think.
Menurut gue masih sereman yang pertama sih. Pertama serem banget.
Ya soalnya kayak neneknya masuk dalam rumah kan. Kalau
Iya.
ya kan enak luar. Kalau anak ini masuk, gue masih sereman yang ini.
Iya bener sih.
Horornya kan ya. Kalau yang tadi kan
Iya.
lebih ada pasien yang punya mental issue kan.
Iya,
Kalau ini kan
apa sering ya di luar negeri terjadi kayak gitu ya? Kayaknya di sini
Oh,
jarang-jarang. Ini kayaknya jarang-jarang.
kan jarang. Nggak sebenarnya kalau dipikir-pikir gue pernah aja gitu cerita-cerita udah kalau di Indonesia. Cuman biasanya di kantor dah gue dengernya. Kantor, kampus, gitu-gitu.
Kantor, asrama gitu kan.
Ya, gitu-gitu.
Iya,
Ya, kena begitulah ya, Gap ya.
Iya.
Makanya berdoa ya guys ya, karena dengan berdoa kita menjauhkan diri kita dari segala macam kejahatan. Gabriel Teguh itu.
Ini makanya gue undang Jojo nih ke video gue. Soalnya ini kalian bisa mendapat makna-makna hidup yang baik di sini.
Mantap guys.
My roommate George and I met through work. We live 15 minutes from the office and carpool together every day. To get right into it, recently we got a new neighbor. As recent as 2 weeks ago, actually. We didn't see him unpacking or anything. We never even saw what he looked like. We didn't even know if he was a man or a woman, or how many people moved in. But I say he because obviously we found out eventually. So on the third day, George and I actually went next door to introduce ourselves, but he didn't answer the door. He was home, his car was in the driveway. We figured maybe he just couldn't answer it for whatever reason. As we were walking back down the driveway, George stopped me and told me under his breath to look at the window next to the front door. I looked and saw a kink in the blinds. A man was holding it up and staring through it like a creep. George and I looked at each other and kept walking, agreeing that was both insanely awkward and creepy. Now we knew already he was not going to be the best of neighbors. That night at around 1 in the morning, I just started hearing noises coming from outside. It's warm where we live year-round, so the windows are always open. I went to go look outside. My room is upstairs, so it kind of overlooks the neighbor's backyard, which was where the sound was coming from. I saw the neighbor. He was some big-looking guy wearing a hoodie with the hood up, which was weird given that it was like 72 degrees out, and he was sawing a big piece of wood. It was a ridiculous scene. I went to go knock on George's door. Apparently he was already awake from the noise too. We had work early the next morning, and what this guy was doing at this hour was nuts, and it went on for some time. We agreed to go over and ask him politely to stop. Since he was outside, we knocked on the gate instead of the door. Just as we did, the sawing stopped. We expected the gate to open any second, but it never did. At least the sawing stopped though, so we went back to sleep. It wasn't until a few nights later that we heard noises in the middle of the night again. I woke up, but couldn't figure out what the sounds were right away. Not until I got to the window and realized the sounds were screams. The screaming seemed to be coming from inside the house next door, and I saw the neighbor outside in his backyard again. He was hurrying into his house, but he was dragging something. I couldn't tell what. Then he stopped and looked up at my window. I moved away from the window as soon as I realized. I ran to George's door. He was already awake from the noises too. He got on the phone with the police right away to report this. I stood right by his doorway the whole time listening. Then there was a slam from downstairs. It was our back door. We looked at each other with horrified looks on our faces. George yelled into the phone to send help because the man just entered our house. While he stayed on the phone with the cops, I went to the hallway and then to the stairway.
Gue ngomong aja, sorry ya. Gue kalau ada kejadian gini, gue nggak mau keluar dari kamar gue.
Gue kayak iya sama, gue bakal tetap di kamar. Cuman kayak mikir gitu, kira-kira jalan keluar selain pintu utama di mana yang kira-kira dia nggak tahu. Jadi bisa kabur dari rumah.
Jujur aja ya, kan
Karena kalau misalnya dia bilang badannya gede, tinggal didobrak.
iya.
Bener deh. Oke.
Apa lu barusan nyoba ngedobrak pintu lu sendiri gitu?
Enggak gitu dong. Enggak, ada Joen.
Oke, melanjut dari pertanyaan yang lu tadi. Kalau gue ya, kan dia berarti logikanya dia udah masuk ke dalam rumah kita. Kita asumsikan gitu dong ya. Nah, berarti kita berusaha keluar tapi berusaha untuk tidak menemui dia. Berarti kita dari kamar.
Iya itu.
Nah, kamarnya kan tadi kan katanya jendelanya dibuka.
Lantai 2.
Nah iya sih, tapi tadi lu lihat nggak? Kamarnya rumahnya nggak terlalu tinggi sih sebenarnya.
Itu ilustrasi. Siapa tahu tinggi. Tapi lompat dari lantai 2 pun kalau jatuhnya salah patah tulang ya kok. Kalau udah patah tulang jatuh keluar, orangnya dengar, udah habis.
Wah, udah habis.
Lari kan.
Udah patah tulang terus lu nggak kuat untuk teriak gitu. Wah!
Makanya.
Sumpah, lu nahan teriak tuh udah kayak apa? Lu nggak bisa ya gitu. Udah, lu tinggal pura-pura mati aja gitu. Orangnya soalnya udah pasti keluar. Orangnya soalnya udah pasti keluar. Tapi kita liatin aja. Michael jatuh dari lantai 4, buktinya masih selamat.
Patah tulang kan.
Patah tulang.
Tulang.
Cuman gara-gara pengen makan roti.
Tapi itu gak jelas banget, sumpah. Gue masih nggak ngerti kejadiannya.
Gara-gara marah gak dibeliin roti sama ibunya, dia jatuh dari lantai 4.
Gak jelas. Untung masih hidup.
Untung masih hidup loh. Untung masih hidup. Yeah.
I looked down the stairs and listened. There was creaking in the floorboards down there. I tiptoed back to George's room and shut the door. He told the woman on the line to have the police come in through the back door immediately and then hung up. There's no lock on his door, so we pushed up against the door in case, God forbid, the man tried to open it. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs fast. Then the bathroom door opened. Footsteps then moved quickly to George's door, and we began to push as hard as we could. The man tried pushing the door open, ramming it, and then hitting it with some kind of blunt object. And that was the exact reason we didn't try to overpower him. We didn't know what kind of weapons he could have. No matter what he did, though, he couldn't push through the door. We heard him go downstairs, and all was quiet. A few minutes passed, and we finally decided to open the door and peek outside. It wasn't in the hallway. Suddenly, we heard a man shout police in a deep, commanding voice. George and I ran downstairs in relief, but when we got there, we didn't see any police. I noticed right away, however, that someone was hiding behind our dining room table. I told George to run back upstairs with me, and then the man hiding behind the table got up and chased us up the stairs. This time we went to the bathroom where we could at least lock the door.
Ini penyelundupnya pintar juga loh.
Iya, Ego.
Penyelundupnya pintar juga loh. Dia jago banget. Dia pura-pura jadi polisi, dia teriak polisi. Pintar loh.
Itu 2000 IQ move.
Iya, makanya. Is this Einstein trying to rob a house?
But we weren't in there for long, because once again we heard someone shout police downstairs, this time for real. The man banging on the door stopped, and there was silence upstairs. George and I screamed, up here, and the two police officers came up the stairs, yelling at the man to drop his weapon. We heard the sound of a knife being dropped to the floor, and when the police told us to come out, we did. They brought him out to the police car in cuffs and put him in the back seat. We told the officers to check his house because we heard screams. They went in with guns drawn as another cop car pulled up in front of our house, and then two more cop cars pulled up 2 minutes later. We were shocked to see the cops come out of the house with a woman crying hysterically. She had been locked in his basement and she was pressed up against the door, screaming as loud as she could. There was also a dead body in the bag the man had been dragging in the backyard. We didn't find out the whole story behind who this woman was, or who the dead body was, but we're pretty sure the man was going to jail for life. The house is now back up for rent, and we're just hoping somebody normal moves in.
Gila. Pembunuh.
Di antara semuanya, kalau gue harus milih, tetap yang nenek.
Oh, buset. Yang terakhir menurut gue yang nenek-nenek serem. Itu gue kasih nomor 2. Yang nomor 3 yang paling gak serem sih yang nomor 2 ya. Yang apa tuh yang anak kecil.
Ya kalau dipikir-pikir neneknya nggak ada
pisau.
Nggak ada senjata ya. Iya. 3-1-2.
Berarti yang paling serem 3, terus habis itu nomor 2 1, terus habis itu yang anak kecil terakhir. Okay. Weh, berarti kita masih maskulin.
Judging dari muka kita sekarang, kayak kena mental.
tinggal nunggu waktunya siapa yang mau gedor di tangga duluan sekarang.
Gap, amit gap. Ini. Astaga. Tapi coba bayangin deh, kalau misalnya suatu hari lu pindah ke luar negeri, terus kejadian kayak gitu, salah satu di antara ketiga itu terjadi. Kira-kira yang paling lu nggak mau terjadi ke lu yang mana?
Iya, yang nomor 2 lah.
Oke.
Tapi nggak tahu ya, kalau itu kan cuma beberapa hari doang nomor 2. Kalau ternyata yang nomor 2 itu kayak diperpanjang kayak sampai setahun tuh kayak gimana ya? Kalau misalnya gue setiap hari gitu, gue bisa kena mental.
Iya, gue depresi nanti yang ada.
Depresi. Setiap hari gue khawatirin terus, duh ini gue sama siapa ya di rumah? Kok ini bola keluar terus maunya? Kok setiap malam gue ngeliat ada anak kecil di luar, ada yang ketawa terus, kena mental gue.
Iya, gue. Serem.
Lama-lama kalau dipikir yang nomor 1 tuh paling gak serem.
Gue ngebayangin ngedobrak masuknya itu yang serem.
Nah, iya.
Intinya, pokoknya kalau misalnya hampir ada sesuatu yang ngedobrak masuk paksa, itu paling serem lah.
Iya.
Apalagi kalau
Terus
misalnya tapi kita nggak tahu dia masuk, terus tiba-tiba udah masuk. Wih.
Nah, iya makanya misalnya ada yang ngetok gitu, tok gitu, kita biarin gitu. Dia belum mulai kenceng, tok, terus tiba-tiba berhenti. Lu keluar gitu, lu nggak ngeliat siapa-siapa, tiba-tiba dia muncul depan lu. Nah, udah lah.
Itu kayak sequence film horor banget dah.
Dia diketok-ketok, nggak tiba-tiba berhenti, nggak ada yang pecah, nggak ada apa-apa, tiba-tiba depan lu. Udahlah.
Udah.
Good game.
Udah. Kelar ya, gue kelar.
Kelar. Makasih semua sudah menemani kita semua. Semoga kalian tidak ketakutan seperti kita. Enggak, kita mah nggak ketakutan ya. Kita nggak ketakutan.
Nggak takut.
Terima kasih semua untuk menonton video kali ini. Terima kasih untuk Jojo udah menemani gue selama video menyeramkan ini.
Oke.
Jangan lupa untuk subscribe channel gue. Jangan lupa untuk turn on notification gue. Turn on notification channel.
Oke.
Jangan lupa untuk follow temen gue Jonathan Atmaja di Instagramnya. Nanti gue share linknya di deskripsi. Oke, kita akan ketemu kembali di video berikutnya. Dah guys.
Oke. Udah semuanya.
Udah semua.